So Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492. He got his shot, remember, because King Ferdinand of Aragon, Queen Isabella of Castile, the Catholic monarchs as they were called, they had helped to unify Spain and those very important kingdoms through their marriage. But then, very importantly, they were waging war to kick out the Muslims in Spain called the Moors. This is the period of the Spanish Inquisition. Lots of terrible, terrible stuff happening. But by 1492, this reconquista, this reconquering of Spain had been completed, and they found themselves with a lot of extra capital, having kicked out all of these Moors and Jews. So, with all this extra capital, now Spain is looking outward. They see their rivals Portugal with Bartholomew Diaz rounding the Cape of Good Hope. Vasco da Gama, very importantly, is going to be, sailing all the way to India, getting those riches. Spain wants to beat Portugal at its own game. They want to find a sea route to the east as well. They want to catch up to their rivals. And here comes this Genoese, this Italian mariner, Christopher Columbus, with his crazy idea. And the advisors of Ferdinand and Isabella, they told their monarchs, hey, look, this guy is crazy. His math is bad. He's off by thousands of miles. His trip is guaranteed to fail. But the difference between the Spanish court and all these other courts that Columbus had been to that rejected him was that Spain had just consolidated. They had all this extra money. Um, and so what did they have to lose? If they give Columbus three tiny ships and he sails off to the west into the Atlantic and disappears forever, I mean, it's not the end of the world for them. But if he's right, what they stood to gain was tremendous. And so they take a risk on Columbus. That's how he's going to get his shot. So the Nina, the little girl, the Pinta, the painted lady, uh, that's exactly like it sounds, the painted lady. I'll let you think about the context of that. And the Santa Maria, the flagship, the larger, slower ship. The Nina and the Pinta were both caravel class, like the Portuguese smaller lateen sailed ships. Santa Maria was a little bit more lumbersome. These three small ships, and yes, this is the late 1400s. These are not the big wooden sailing vessels you might think of, like Master and Commander in the 1800s. These are small ships. They're going to go out into the Atlantic, and Columbus is going to try to sail west to find the East. Of course, there were some of the crew that were worried. They were sailing out into the unknown, which was the biggest worry for most of them, just that they would end up adrift or lost. Because again, most educated people in the late 1400s knew the earth was round, but the problem that they had with Columbus's idea was that he was underestimating the size of the earth. He thought he'd only have about 3,000 miles to get over to where he wanted. In actuality, they figured it was closer to 15,000, and they were right, which would have been impossible to sail at this time. And Columbus does do some really shady stuff. Columbus is a shady dude. One of the most infamous things that he does along this journey is that he promises the crew that anybody who sees land first is going to get a huge reward, um, like 500 galleons or something, like a huge, tremendous gold reward for spotting land first. And then, of course, when they spot land, the crew comes up, and the guy who saw is like, "Okay, I want my reward." And Columbus says, "No, you're silly. I saw that land the night before." Like just shady stuff like that. And here's Columbus, on this trip, lying also in his books, in his logs, his records about how far they'd gone, lying to his crew. And so there were several attempted mutinies that almost derailed the entire mission. So, October 1492, they do spot land, and this is not North America. This is not continental United States. This is going to be the islands of the Bahamas. A small Bahamian island is landed upon, and Columbus and his crew, they get there and they see the natives, and Columbus is going to call them Indians because he thought he was in the East Indies. Um, so these are Bahamian native people, Taino, Arawak. Lucayan. These are the first people that are going to have contact with these Europeans in 1492. Now, when Columbus gets there on that first mission, he is going to record in his journal basically about his observations of the natives. He says, "They brought us parrots and balls of cotton and spears and many other things. They willingly traded everything they owned. They were well built, with good bodies and handsome features. They do not bear arms, they do not know them. For I showed them a sword, they took it by the edge and cut themselves out of ignorance. They have no iron, their spears are made of cane." Sorry. "Their spears are made of cane. They would make fine servants. With 50 men we could subjugate them all and make them do whatever we want." So basically, Christopher Columbus has two major goals in mind when he's making this expedition of exploration. First is gold, and the second is slavery. And he's going to bring back a lot of these natives on his first voyage from these Bahamian Islands as kind of proof of conquest. Like, here, look what I have found. Look at these people that are so easy to subjugate because they don't know any of the stuff that we have. And of course, natives seeing what the Europeans had, many of them were shocked and awed and amazed. They had never seen anything. Like the horse, although I believe the horse is brought on one of Columbus's later missions. He has 4 total missions. I don't know if he brought any horses on the first mission. But that's going to be a major shock for Europeans, or sorry, for natives who had never seen the horse. It was this huge creature with the rider and the horse. It looked like some kind of monster. Um, the Spanish use of their dogs. There were some native groups kind of spread throughout the Americas that had some domesticated dogs, but most, especially in the Caribbean, did not see dogs, and they definitely did not domesticate animals like that. Um, so that's going to be a shock. And then the weapons of the Spanish, like Columbus said, the swords. The Native Americans, weapon wise, are living kind of somewhere between the Stone Age and the Bronze Age, depending on the tribe and the empire you're looking at in the Americas. And here comes the Europeans, here comes the Spanish with their finely made steel, from Toledo, the greatest place, arguably in the world at the time, to make armor and make swords and halberds and pikes, all these weapons. And the Native Americans had no idea. And of course, also gunpowder, cannons, the arquebus, early musket type weapons. These were like thunder to the natives. So all these things are going to be very, very important. But basically, Columbus on his first mission, he brings back some natives. He brings back a tiny bit of gold, and then he's going to become super famous. And then he's going to go back 3 more times. And his second voyage, Columbus is going to settle and have a actual colony built on the island of Hispaniola. Um, oh, and also kind of an interesting thing, the first meeting between the natives and the Spaniards was pretty friendly by all accounts of the Spanish that we have. But on that first mission, what's going to happen is that the Santa Maria goes down, the flagship, the biggest ship, in the wintertime, around Christmas. Columbus is forced to leave around like 40 of his crew because they just can't fit everybody back on the Nina and the Pinta, these two smaller, quicker ships. So they have to leave some of the crew behind on this island in the Caribbean with these natives. And they built the first European fort there, La Navidad, for Christmas time. And Columbus promises his crew, "Hey, hang on, I'm going to be back for you." And the natives, are being friendly. Looks like a good setup. Hopefully they can survive. Okay. Columbus and his crew come back on the second voyage a few years later, and all of the crew that had been left behind from the sinking of the Santa Maria, which natives had actually helped when that sunk. They dived in and helped save some of the Spaniards then, which was, amazing. But when they come back years later, all of the Spaniards that had been left behind were dead, killed. And it's likely that this was due to fighting over resources. The Spaniards were starving. The natives didn't want to give their food up. Tit for tat killings, that sort of thing. But regardless, this is the big shift that happens. No longer does Columbus see these people as beautiful and strong and willing laborers in this great effort. Now they are people to be completely and utterly subjugated and dominated, kind of heathen savages. And so that is a big turning point also in the treatment of the Native Americans. And you should definitely also know some of the Spanish accounts of what Columbus is going to be like as governor during his treatment of the Native Americans in search for gold. We have records from many of the Spanish diaries and journals, and later on, also very famously, the Spanish missionary Bartholomew de las Casas writes extensively about the Spanish treatment and what Columbus had done. And these accounts are going to form what becomes known as the Black Legend, or basically how the Spanish were so cruel and vicious to the natives that by comparison, many other European countries, when they come to the Americas, think that they're going to have a much easier time because they're going to treat the natives better. I mean, the Spanish were the worst, so of course they'd be better, which is going to be also kind of funny because how would the natives know the differences between the different European countries? It's like the Europeans trying to figure out the difference between the different Native American groups. Um, anyway, that's the Black Legend. And so some of the treatments of the Native Americans. Um, so on Hispaniola, as governor, Columbus and his men are going to order all natives 14 years or older to collect a certain amount of gold every 3 months. Natives who didn't collect enough gold had their hands cut off. And this was, of course, an impossible task. There was virtually no gold on Hispaniola. This is modern day where Haiti and the Dominican Republic are. There was only just a little dust, a little gold dust in streams. So very little gold, and they're demanded to bring in large quantities that just isn't there. Many natives fled and tried to escape, but they were consequently hunted down and killed by the Spaniards. Columbus would sick these large Spanish mastiffs, these large hunting hounds on natives, and they would hunt them down. Um, in addition to cutting off their hands, they would slice off pieces of them for fun, seemingly. There's one account of these two Spaniards encountering some native boys, pretty young, who were playing with some parrots. And the Spaniards, just for sporting, basically beheaded the kids and took the parrots for themselves. But just general disregard for Native American life, extremely cruel. Eventually, like within a year or two, natives on Hispaniola were committing mass suicides. This was a genocide that was occurring, and it's not because of European diseases spreading. It actually is going to take like 2 decades basically before we get the first real word of like smallpox ravaging native populations. So this death and destruction was all from cruelty by the Spaniards inflicted against the natives. Um, the mass suicides, the Arawaks, basically, and it wasn't just suicide. This was the cruelty. They go from, um, hundreds of thousands, and basically by 1650. This is about 150 years after Columbus first touched down. The Arawaks are wiped off the island entirely, like gone. Um, During Columbus's tenure and his brother Diego's tenure, the Columbus brothers also were notoriously cruel, and other Spaniards were sometimes cruel. And of course, there were some Spaniards like De las Casas who looked on this with horror. Um, but it was reported that like Native American women would kill their babies rather than have them become slaves to the Spaniards. And that they would, cripple them as well. Spanish mines were exceptionally brutal places to work. Eventually, when we get to like South America and stuff, the silver mines of Potosi